Aditi.
Hi, I'm Navi.
Welcome to our podcast.
A simple conversation.
This is a big one this time.
Yes, it is. Today is all about vulnerability.
Ooh, I feel like a lot of people have like a big black cloud over this one because it takes a lot of being exposed and feeling exposed to actually
being vulnerable.
Yeah.
A lot of people fear it, I think, because it is a bit of a misunderstood feeling. To be vulnerable is to expose yourself, to put yourself out there. I think what we're doing right now is quite vulnerable for both of us. This is not something that comes naturally to us.
Yeah.
But we've decided to own it and put ourselves out there and start having these kind of conversations.
I think it's very relevant now because one meets a lot of people where you're kind of just projecting the best part of you, you know, and we do that too. And I feel like taking the time to just get to know someone and see what's under the surface is very beneficial because you find where they're coming from. It's hard to actually be vulnerable because it's also just the exposure part of it, and then the act of you're open for like criticism, and obviously one hates that.
Yeah, that's why I think people are exposing themselves in terms of sharing more about their lives on social media or wherever else they're sharing it, but they're not actually being vulnerable because it's a masked version of vulnerability.
Filtered version as well.
Very filtered. So that's that's why I think we're all kind of immune to being vulnerable because I don't think a lot of us know how to be vulnerable or even to feel or know when someone actually is being vulnerable.
I think it also comes from a place with a stigma attached to it because it's a sign of weakness.
Yeah.
And obviously no one wants to be weak. Everyone wants to be, you know, like a confident,
in control
kind of person. And that's kind of a misconception because having that vulnerability, for example, with me, I have confronted my vulnerability with my close friends and with you. And it does put you at a little bit of a sense, it gives you a sense of ease, you know, and it gives you that confidence where you're able to kind of just deal with your problems. And so that little opening up and feeling vulnerable actually does lead you to feeling better.
Yeah, it's being authentic, I think. So as we're having conversations, it is being vulnerable in terms of sharing information that you most times would not want to. Or you would think that you're going to judge me, I don't wish to share this information, how is the other person going to react? All of those things stop you from being vulnerable. But I think once you just take the leap and you end up putting yourself in, whether it's a new experience, whether it's sharing something that's deep secret or some emotion that you're feeling with someone else, there's different ways of being vulnerable.
Yeah. I think also it comes from like a childhood where we've been told by our parents that, oh, if you're a strong kid, strong children don't cry, things like that. And I feel like that's another misconception there because...
That's another part of being vulnerable is to cry. I think that's, when you think of vulnerability, the first word for me would come up is crying.
Yeah.
And I like to control my emotions and I don't wish to cry at the drop of a hat. But sometimes when you do end up crying or releasing that emotion, you feel a lot lighter and better after crying.
I'm a big bathroom crier. I love
We've been taught not to cry.
Yeah.
We've been taught, don't cry, be strong, just get over it, dust it off and just move on.
Yeah.
Which obviously growing up now, being an adult, it's quite hard for you to kind of tap into being vulnerable because childhood has taught us don't cry and you need to suppress that emotion of vulnerability and just move on and don't deal with it.
I think also people's reaction towards it now as adults, we're so concerned because we've been told our entire lives to not do it, and then suddenly we're thinking, oh no, I'm like literally bursting at the seams and I want to be vulnerable, but you somehow don't know how to do it because you're just concerned that what if the other person laughs it off, and that fear of rejection is just daunting.
Which is quite sad, to be honest, because I think the most vulnerable you ever are is as a kid. Because growing up, you're experiencing everything for the first time. Everything is new. Everything you're getting exposed to is for the first time, and that is being vulnerable. Because even now, as an adult, being vulnerable is putting yourself in a new situation. But as a child, that's what we get taught to do. Everything is a first, which is an amazing feeling. To see the world through a kid's eyes is obviously completely different because us as adults, we're controlling everything. We're controlling where we're going, what we're doing, how we're feeling, who we're around. All of these controls are the opposite of being vulnerable.
We actually watched this video by Dr. Joe Dispenza, And we're going to post this at the end of this below in the comments.
Yeah, we have a link below.
And he talks about frozen feelings and how all of us are getting used to the fact that we just experience certain things and we're not putting ourselves into those new experiences. And that kind of just allows us to be in our comfort zone and then control our experiences, which is in a way a good way, and it protects us, but it also doesn't help one maneuver into new territory.
It stops you from evolving, because I think the more vulnerable you are, you're evolving as a person, I think. And if we get stuck in these frozen feelings and control every part of our emotion, it's not going to really help us experience new things or new feelings or have different experiences in our lives. And we're just going to be stuck at just one pace.
Yeah. I remember that, I think it was like when I was 21 and I had a lot of stuff that was going on in my life. I think 3-4 years before that I lost my mum and I had to deal with all these other things, and all my peers were going through just regular stuff like applying to universities, stuff with their parents, and for me I found it difficult to actually come out and say it just because no one else was going through it. I felt like I might be judged, and that's such a silly thing, because now when I talk to those same friends, and those were good friends, it has nothing to do with the other person at all. It was just me feeling unsure if I should speak about my stuff. And now I think about it and it was so silly that just having that little bit of a conversation might have changed my entire perspective on my situation.
Yeah. I think that comes to when you're internalizing your vulnerability, because we're too scared or afraid to show it. So even if you know you are being put in a vulnerable situation, it depends on your personality, but most of us would wish to control it and control the image that we're setting out and how we're dealing with the situation, because we want people to think we're strong, we know what's happening, we can get things done, you're a go-getter, rather than dwelling, crying, being vulnerable. It's kind of something that we all steer away from, because we want to fix the problem rather than look into it.
And the thing is that it's not even steering away, because those vulnerable situations, if you're not vulnerable, it leads to acts of aggression or anger. And that's actually not even steering away from it, it's just masking it with unnecessary...
it opens up a whole another can of worms. Because I've experienced that, because I'm a bit like you, where I do like to control everything, especially my emotions. So I do not put myself out there as vulnerably as some people are. So if someone was to maybe describe my personality traits, I would hope they would say she's a strong person. So for me to be vulnerable is the complete opposite, and I try not to. But recently I found when I have been put into a vulnerable situation, or my reaction is turning more towards vulnerability than the strongness that I have, people around me were confused. And they were just not understanding what kind of emotion I'm expressing. And that would turn into me being more angry, because I was like, why do you guys not get what I'm trying to say? So I think people around you get confused because we suppress vulnerability so much, because then when it does come out, people around are a bit confused because we don't know how to handle another person's vulnerability.
That's true. And that said, by the way, we should actually just motivate people to still try and try again, you know, because it might not be, you might not get the correct response the first time. But it's always good to go in for it again, because the fact is that the downside of keeping it all in is quite severe as well.
That's why I think it's because it's an emotion that we are all scared of, where it's not like a happy emotion that everyone wishes to be around happy people, and I will know when you're happy, you're smiling. I would know when you're angry because you're screaming. But being vulnerable, I think it doesn't show as much. And you'll either keep it to yourself in your own room, or you would end up being quiet. It's an emotion that kind of needs to be uncovered, and it's not just out there openly written on someone's face.
It's actually quite a complicated... It's like it's one of those words which are it's a transitional, because you feel a certain way, then you have to be vulnerable to feel, you know, the outcome of that situation, and that transition period is so confusing.
No, I agree. It is, and I think it's just speaking about it more, like having these kind of conversations and just tapping into what the emotion is, because it might just be sadness and not vulnerability. I think you need to just start having the conversations and speaking about it, so we are all aware of what we're going through, what another person's going through.
Exactly. Just look, if you're married, tell your husband, look, I'm just feeling vulnerable. Can you just give me the time of day, even if it's 5 minutes? Tell your father, mother, sister, best friend, and just reach out for it, because there is that light at the end of the tunnel. And it's important to...
Because that was another stigma against vulnerability, is that women can be and men can't be. So you can be the damsel in distress and the man's going to come and rescue you, whereas men are meant to be strong, men don't cry, which is all not true, because everyone should feel vulnerable.
Of course.
Have that emotion, experience it, and help release it.
Exactly. Getting stuck in these societal misconceptions is very... It can get a bit...
It's unhealthy, and it's something that it gets drone into us, which is just something that we need to change.
Yeah, we need to relearn a lot of these behavioral patterns, because if we get stuck with the same thing over and over again, we're just injuring ourselves and our dynamics with different people.
And it becomes a shock to your system, actually, because when I look back, I can remember my mum crying if she's watching a movie. So I've seen that before. But I've not seen my dad cry. And it's a weird emotion when I have seen him on the occasion cry, because I don't know how to handle it. So now I kind of understand how people might be around me when I'm being vulnerable for the first time, because if no one's seen that emotion coming from a person, for it to happen for the first time, it takes a toll on you. Because as an audience member, you don't know how to react. Along with the person who's actually in that position, I wouldn't know how to process my vulnerability.
It's important to actually remember that when someone is being vulnerable with you and you're at the receiving end of someone's vulnerability, is to try and accept it. Even if you've been through a bit of a dismissive time with someone else, I think just that could enhance that friendship with someone else, and just you could open yourself up.
I think being vulnerable with each other is a way of developing meaningful relationships moving forward, because if I was being vulnerable in a situation with you and you were not prepared to receive it and were dismissive, it doesn't mean that I can't do that again with you, but I know that you're maybe not ready to receive what I have to say. And maybe I should find somebody else who's capable of understanding what I'm trying to say, or my emotion, understanding what I'm feeling.
Vulnerability does enhance relationships, because there's a certain level of truth and substance that one is required to communicate with each other. And if someone is dismissive over and over again, then you know how that person is, and you can just move on and find someone else. It doesn't make them a bad person, it just makes them maybe they're not ready, like you just said.
Which is more common, because I think a lot of us have surface level relationships. And not a lot of us are diving in deep to be vulnerable and expose everything about ourselves. And for me, I think it's something that takes time. It takes time to trust the person, and how long you maybe have known someone, or who the person is and what information you're sharing. I think there's a lot of different factors into what allows you to start being vulnerable.
That's true. But the act of just reaching out to someone is important. And a person who you trust, a person who you can depend on, and that's just the starting of your journey.
And I think ways that people can start being vulnerable, obviously, as we've spoken about, is having a good person to speak to and exposing or just releasing whatever you're feeling. Also, it is trying new things. So maybe trying up a new hobby, doing something new, or meeting new people and trying to make new connections, because that allows you to be vulnerable in the innate state of just being vulnerable, because it's new.
Get out of that frozen feelings mode. And just try out new things, have those newer conversations,
Because I think what will come at the receiving end of that, nobody knows, because it's kind of an unknown thing that you're trying for the first time. I find that personally, that's a good way to start being vulnerable.
Guys, vulnerability is a process. It takes time. Do not be hard on yourselves.
On that note, that brings us to the end of this episode. We hope you guys enjoyed being vulnerable with us. Be sure to tune in next time for another simple conversation. I'm Navi.
I'm Aditi. And remember, keep talking.